But me as the bookkeeper, I'm like, you've got hundreds of thousands of dollars just sitting in a savings, like not being utilized. You could afford to pay people.
These are not people that were hired. These are volunteers. Of course, they don't know anything about our organization. They know nothing about our day-to-day. They know nothing about our financial situation. They're just regurgitating what Rolling Stone and all these other hack jobs are saying.
But that's when I started doing bookkeeping and I would say general admin for Burn 24/7. And I got Light a Candle as a client.
A few million a year was going through Light a Candle, and you became the bookkeeper.
Know nothing about our financial situation.
I started doing bookkeeping and I would say general admin.
Know nothing about our financial situation.
Sean has millions of dollars in the bank. Why am I fighting for $300 that I spent of my own money to I was like racing back to get it on stage before like the event started.
Wake up and win. Wake up and win. Wake up and win. Wake up.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Wake Up and Win podcast. Tonight, I am your solo host, Blaise. Looking forward to talking to a pretty cool guy out of the movement from the Burn 24/7. And this is an important conversation because it has to do with Sean Feucht. If you guys don't know, Sean Feucht started the Burn 24/7 many years ago, back in the mid to early 2000s. And there is a website out right now called truthandfreedomstories.com. And it is covering tons of stories of mismanagement of funds, also spiritual abuse, and many other stories about Sean Feucht. And there are lots of different opinions about this story coming out because Sean in the charismatic movement is he's a pretty big figure where a lot of people really champion, what Sean does with the COVID time where he did Let Us Worship and got people out on the streets worshiping, his conservative politics, etc. And so he's kind of a champion in the conservative charismatic movement. But we have to look at these stories because the fruit of somebody's ministry is not just, who got saved when they were leading worship, but the fruit of their ministry and the fruit of their life is also what is the trail of experiences behind the scenes. Who are you behind the scenes and what is the experience that people are having with you behind the scenes? And this is why we're platforming these stories. And so if you're just diving into this, you can go back and watch the story we did with Jesse Westwood recently. He told his story being a part of the Burn 24/7 and doing the worship meetings with Sean and traveling with Sean. And frankly, the way that he was forced to basically smuggle to get things across the border, which is wild. And then we had Christy Gafford, who shared her story of being one of the main communications directors of the Burn 24/7. And of course, we're watching the way Sean is pointing at these people and saying that they were not that important. They didn't have important roles. But tonight we are talking to somebody that had an important role within the Burn and an important role in Sean's ministries, to the point of where he had his access, even as of within the last few weeks, to the bank accounts of the Burn 24/7. And this guy's a great guy. I've had a couple conversations with him so far. I'm looking forward to talking. So welcome to the show tonight, Richie Booth. How you doing, Richie?
Good, man. How are you?
I'm good. Coming all the way from Redding, California. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, that's home.
Right on, man. Right on. Well, it's good to meet you, Richie. It's been good to talk to you and get to know you a little bit here. Tell us, Richie, if you would, just give us an overview of who you are. And I know, tell us how you got involved in the Burn, but who are you, man? Just so people know you don't have to give us the 20-minute version of your testimony, but who's Richie Booth and how did you get involved in the worship movement and all that? And who are you today?
Yeah. I'm Richie. I'm originally from, we shared some time in Tyler, Texas. That's where I grew up, and then studied in Texas and lived in a few different cities in Texas for a couple years and was doing the kind of corporate life, working down in Houston, Texas. And then I went to a worship school with Burn 24/7 one summer. It was called the Hillside Intensive in the UK. And it was about 12 days long and kind of found a lot of language in the Burn 24/7 DNA for things that were in my heart, but didn't have context or language for. And Sean had just moved to Redding around that time, and after this kind of marking experience at a worship school. Came back to Texas, and I was a part of this awesome house church. We would have prayer meetings every week on Wednesday night that would go 4 and 5 hours, and just a really beautiful flow of worship and prayer. And I was, playing cajon, and really like grew in the Lord. And that was 7 years for me in that house church, and grew in the Lord a lot there, and had taken a couple trips out to Bethel. And one of the guys I led worship with in this little house church had come from Bethel. He went to Bethel and then moved to Texas to study as well. And so it was on my radar, but I was pretty dead set on my like career, and thought that's what I was doing for the rest of my life. I was in finance, and had a great job in Houston. And then I kind of, after this worship school, just came back and reconsidered everything, reconsidered what was really important, what I really wanted, and kind of the logical next move seemed to move out to Reading, where Sean had just moved. Sean was, had just become part of Bethel,
What
and
year was
so
this?
this is 2016
Okay.
that I do the worship school, and I'm
Gotcha.
kind of considering the move, and planning the move, and then 2017 I actually moved to Reading.
Gotcha. And so when you moved to Reading, you connected with Sean at that time, and then how talk about, because I know the Burn is a very organic organization, and in some ways that benefits Sean's narrative of, well, everyone is a volunteer and nobody, was that important necessarily. It's kind of the way he's pitching this right now, saying that anybody that signed this website or say anything was never important to the
Yeah,
Burn. So maybe explain your role and how you got involved with Sean and what that looked like over the next however long that was, however many years that was.
yeah, there was a very natural journey that played out. It wasn't like day one I'm, you know, helping out with things to do with financial things, or involved in like major details. I did in 2016 off the back of that um, Burn Worship School in the UK. I did do an apprent. They call it apprenticeship in the UK. We'd call it internship here, but I did a apprenticeship in the Burn, and that was actually the time Light a Candle was forming an actual entity. It had existed as like a kind of under the umbrella of the missions part of Burn 24/7 for a little bit, but someone in the organization mentored me during that year where I was transitioning and moving. And so in some regards, I was, as far as kind of on the admin side in the UK and Europe side of Burn, I was connected there. And part of the apprenticeship was to help with some administrative tasks. And I remember we did have one conversation. I lived pretty not too far from Austin at the time, and they're like, we might need you to drive to Austin and drop off a filing document, for us getting Light a Candle off the ground. And I ended up not doing that, but I was helping out with some kind of administrative task for the early days of Light a Candle. So then when I moved to Reading, I think that first summer I was in Reading, I did I did meet Sean at like a Burn gathering that was hosted at his house, but
Mm-hmm.
just said hi. Wasn't like getting involved in any details then. But what did happen, kind of my progression, was that the Sean waited 1 year of being in Reading to launch a local like Burn Reading. We call them furnaces. If you'll
Okay.
remember from Tyler, Texas.
Yeah.
So he waited a year to launch the Reading furnace, and so the year I moved there, he had some interns from the BSSM school, and their job for their internship was to launch this local Reading Burn. And so I remember I walked in to my very first Reading Burn one night at call it like 7 or 8 p.m., and I just go up to kind of the people in charge, and I'm like, hey, I've been connected with Burn. I did the Hillside in UK, and through the progression of the night, I found myself like running a soundboard at 2 a.m. and praying for
Right.
the next teams before they. I was like, I'll take the night hours. They had a
Right.
need, and I filled. And kind of, you could probably say the rest is history. But from then on, I was kind of immediately plugged into Burn Reading, and was very involved. I mean, we had an awesome burn here. We were doing, sometimes we'd always try to push the envelope, like 30-hour burns. We had a lot of churches connected in the local community that were a part of it. And I mean, a town like Reading, you've got a massive pool of musicians to pull
Oh
from,
yeah.
so no problem. There's no problem like filling sets, and it's a great chance for different teams and churches to come together and all of that. And so I was very involved in this is all volunteer capacity. I'm
Right.
just you know I'm just loving it. I'm playing cajon on a couple sets, doing a lot of the admin stuff to make it all run and happen, and I'm living my best life. This is like you know what the Tabernacle of David stuff, the like night and day prayer and worship, the people experiencing the presence of God. For me, I was like, if I can put my hands and my time and effort to other people experiencing the presence of God in the ways I have, then that's cooler job or better than any like career I had. Like this is my purpose in life. I want people to encounter God.
Right on.
So
Now, were
I'm in
you like a
ministries.
were you were all volunteer and you were working full time in finance at this time, or?
During my time in so I did 3 years of BSSM. I did
Mm-hmm.
some like freelance work to and odd jobs to pay my way through
Okay, I
school.
gotcha. So you were
Uh,
going through school. You were going to BSSM at that time. Okay.
yeah. So kind of this time in the timeline is like first year, second year. I'm just helping out with the local burn, but pretty at the center of it. And then kind of fast forward to when you finish second year in ministry school, everyone's like, who am I going to intern for? I need to like meet the right person, or it's kind of
Gotcha.
this like networking thing. And
Yeah.
for me, it was like the easiest thing ever. Like I pretty much already, in some ways, knew like I was like, oh, I'm gonna intern with Sean. Like it was like a no brainer. And
Mm-hmm.
when I met Sean, like I would say it seemed that way from his side as well. He was there was really no reason at that point like why it wouldn't be a great fit. I was already connected to the organizations, helping out. But that was when the internship and my direct involvement with Sean really took off, and that coincided with his political campaign in 2019.
Okay. So 2019, you finish up your BSSM second year and you step into an internship with Sean. Because my understanding is that
Correct.
when folks finish out, it's almost like at any ministry school you go to, you're trying to find a way to intern with a local pastor or somewhere in a ministry so you can kind of start getting your hands dirty, get your feet wet, whatever you want to call it. So you get in there with Sean and it's kind of an automatic, immediate fit. Now, at this time, is he
Yeah,
like, is he like, okay, this guy's a finance guy and I know that and I would like to get this guy involved in this way, or did he have knowledge of that, or what was that connection like?
that came later. That came probably after the third year internship. The previous administrative person for Burn stepped down, and there was a need. And so after third year, and I guess let me back up. Some of my third year internship, when you intern with Sean, you're not just like assigned to one thing. You're not just like just burn or just light a candle or just like traveling with Sean. Like you're doing everything. You're
Mm.
taking inventory of CDs and albums in his garage. You're going on an overnight trip to a church to lead worship and tell people about light a candle and mission trip opportunities. You're following Sean to an event where he's speaking and like being on the ministry team. Like basically, if you want to do it, in my experience at least, if you want to do it, like there's an opportunity, there's a need, and there's like a whole crew of us, people that worked with Sean. So kind of you're in this instant kind of group and community, and you're
like
just
eh,
you're
like
going, you're
any
doing.
like any ministry in a sense. That's like, I
Yeah,
mean, I'll just say
right.
in any ministry I've been in, for the most part, unless it's super established and super organized, most of the time when you sign up to be in a ministry or a church, you're going to be doing pretty much anything and everything. Even though you have a specialty, it's like, yeah, you're doing,
Right.
yeah, can you take the trash out, please? Like, it's like pretty much
Yeah,
whatever's
totally.
needed, you're doing. Okay, so you dive
Yeah,
head first. You're all in. You're running around the country with Sean, speaking events, all the stuff, uh, organizing CDs in his garage, all the things. Talk about and obviously, if you want to share some things from that time frame that you feel like would highlight your experiences, please feel free to do that. I'd love you to get to the place where you can say, at this point is when I started getting into the financial side with Sean. But take us there, however, the journey you want to. I mean, this is really a platform for you to share your story. So you can kind of go
Yeah.
that direction as you want, as you feel ready. This episode is brought to you by Wake Up and Win Life Insurance. If you're looking for a life insurance quote, I've got 25 different life insurance carriers, all A-rated carriers. People have asked me like, so you have your own agency? Well, I'm an independent broker. I used to run an agency with other agents, but now I'm just an independent broker. And I just help people with any life insurance companies out there that they can qualify for. And we helped somebody the other day that was getting hung up in certain life insurance companies, couldn't get approved, and then boom, got them approved immediately. So I've got all kinds of options, whether it's term life, whole life, index universal life, infinite banking concepts, even annuities if you're just trying to protect a lump sum of your 401k that's just sitting there after you've already retired. I can help you do rollovers and things like that. So if you're looking for a consultation, book below, and I'm happy to have that convo with you.
So I would say, most of the internship, was amazing. I'm like living my dream. This is what I gave up, my career in Texas for. I'm, you know, Part of why I moved to Reading was because, it was now like the headquarters for Burn, and Sean was there. So I'm kind of at the top of like, hey, this is like everything I dreamed about and was like hoping for. And so that year was mostly like really good experiences and a lot of fun. The team I was with, made like lifelong friends. And there were a few things in that year that I could look back on now and say, oh, those are some red flags. Some of the kind of culture, um, like joking and treatment of women. There were, it was kind of like, it felt at the time like, oh, Sean's kind of like this older brother that, likes to push the right buttons to kind of get people to respond. And if it was like a 16-hour travel day and someone had just, you know, really kind of pushed their own personal limits, and then Sean caught him at the wrong time with the wrong joke, like it wouldn't land well, and they're in tears. And but you're kind of given the benefit of the doubt. You're like, oh well, maybe a bad comment or not the right timing, or maybe just
Yeah,
pushed a little bit too far. But starting to see some things where I'm like, okay, Sean's like, a bit unique in the culture he creates around him. It's definitely like his way or the highway, and much, there's not even time for like debrief. I grew up in a big local church, like I said, in Texas, and we would do big events, that were like pedal to the metal, like tons of, long days, 16-hour days. And I worked at this church like 2 summers, but then after every event, we would come and we would debrief. And it was like, all right, we're going to like order some awesome takeout, and we'll sit for like a whole afternoon, and we're going to talk about everything that didn't work so we can get better, have like a place for feedback. And so I started just noticing, I was like, man, we're going so fast. There's never any time to even just point out some, my like finance background is like solving problems and automating systems and things. So, you know, all over the place, I'm seeing things where I'm like, oh, that could be done way more efficiently. That like thing on the internet with that doesn't work with that form, I could fix that. And this issue on the website with the merch or the inventory, that's like really solvable. So I immediately am just like seeing all these problems, but not even having like the pace to like have the space to like debrief and point out like problems in the team, and that you're kind of seeing an organization. And at the start, when you're just an intern, you're thinking like, well, hey, it's not like really my place
sure.
to these things. But at some point, you start to take ownership of it, and you're like, well, you know, I I can do something here. And there'd be a lot of problem, if it was like an event and you're like going for 12 hours and the Facebook feeds down, like you're not having to like take something to Sean or get his approval or what, you're just fixing the problem, and maybe he
Sure.
knows about it, maybe he doesn't. But so in that space, I was just kind of observing the chaos and calling it dysfunction, and it was his campaign season. And so, you know, anything that just didn't look or feel right, you just wrote off and were like, hey, this is just a crazy political campaign. He's still running like 3 ministries while doing a campaign, and like preaching on some Sundays and leading sets back to home at Bethel. And, you're like, man, you gave so much grace, because you're just like, anything that didn't look or feel right, you're just like, hey, this is
Yeah.
guy's doing a lot.
This is
So if you
2019. This
fast
is
forward,
2019 you're
yeah,
talking
that's
about.
2019 into 2020. So
Hmm.
March 2020 comes, he runs, the final race for his political campaign. Didn't win. That drive back from like his campaign office to Reading was brutal. I felt so invested in it. I cried.
Hmm.
It was like, man, because I was like, I didn't sign up. Actually, didn't sign up for an internship for like a political campaign, but we thought we were gonna like be just doing the itinerant ministry stuff, but he had decided to run, and so that's what our internship turned into for a large part. And I was so excited. I was like, this isn't like normal, but we taking the presence of God into every sphere of society. Like, I like that. If I think that's cool. Like, um, and so was kind of on board for it. But then, yeah, after he lost, there was a couple months where there wasn't any activity. It was COVID. We were all you know shut down, and Sean was doing these online like Instagram faith rallies, and we were still doing some admin stuff for his organizations, but the kind of travel piece died down. And honestly, after like a ton of travel for months, it was a nice little break. But that's when I started doing bookkeeping and I would say general admin for Burn 24/7 in 2020. And at a later date, in 2022, I started, or maybe 2021, I can't remember the timeline exactly. I, through my own like LLC, at this point, later down the line, I had finished ministry school, decided to start like an LLC and do like, bookkeeping services. And I got Light a Candle as a client. So I kind of had
Hmm.
overlapping timelines. Burn was like, I'm doing this. I think it was like $100 a month, where it was like, hey, there's not much activity for Burn. It was just kind of a small engagement. And then with Light a Candle was the, much larger organization. They were doing
Because
a few million a year.
a few million a year through Light a Candle.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's because, just for context, Light a Candle is the overseas ministry of Sean Feucht, where they're supporting orphans and or mission trips overseas. And
Yeah, they've
what?
got
Yeah.
short-term teams, long-term teams,
Okay.
child sponsorship programs.
So a few million a year was going through Light a Candle, and you became the bookkeeper for that arm of. And for
Yeah.
Sean, if you got Sean here, you got the Burn 24/7 that springs off, and that does how much a year? Like 100K a year, like it's real small type of thing, 50K a year, or
It really fell off at 2020 and his political campaign. So yeah, less than probably $100,000 a year of
okay,
donations.
very small. Then you've
Yeah.
got Light a Candle, which is a few million a year, and then you've got Let Us
Mhm.
Worship, which that blew up, right? I mean, what was that per year?
His Well, that's a whole interesting conversation where Sean Feucht Ministries, the 990s, after I think 1 year of Let Us Worship, they trail off and he converts it into a church. So we don't have a full picture there, but I think for you can probably pull this up on your on the video at some point, but on his 990 and either 2020 or 21, I think Sean Feucht Ministries did, I want to say 4 or 5 million, and that was the organization that Let Us Worship was essentially like under, like you
Gotcha.
call it a doing
Doing
business
business
as.
as, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so Light a Candle's flowing at 3 mil, 2-3 mil, and Let Us
Mhm.
Worship's at like 4 mil, and our Sean Feucht Ministries, and
Right.
you're bookkeeping mainly for Light a Candle at that time. But do you have access to see the other stuff during that time with Let Us
I don't
Worship, or no?
SF Sean Feucht Ministries and Let Us Worship. I've never seen anything. It was kind of, there was like a veil that was like where most of his activity happened, and then Light a Candle, I had full access and was fully involved in that, and then Burn, I was helping with, but it was very minuscule.
Okay, so I know you had some experiences like that, like you have a quote on the website where you basically say, like, you had seen the churn and burn style of ministry where you're 2016, 17, you coming in. By 18, 19, you're like, okay, there's people that are just leaving. They're there, then they're gone, there, then they're gone, which is, ministries, especially when there's volunteers, that's going to happen. But you made a very specific point. You said, I don't want to be that. I want to stay committed to this thing. I want to be here for the long term. And then I guess eventually talk about what you started to notice that made you start to realize why people were leaving.
Yeah, I think the quote was something along the lines of like, hey, everyone, Sean says no one's loyal, and everyone leaves Sean. I'm going to be the one that doesn't leave. But Sean's telling that narrative of kind of like people go off and deconstruct, or they get hurt by the church and they get bitter and they leave, and kind of the cautionary tales of like in the prayer and worship movement, we don't want to end up like this, and I'm thinking it's this like holy message of like keep our hearts pure before God, and stay in right relationships, and with people and one another, and not let like um, things come against friendships. And so I'm thinking like, okay, these basically Sean spends a narrative for every person that would leave of like, yeah, they got hurt, so they left the burn, or kind of they went liberal or woke, so they left, or kind of like
Yeah.
really really dogging people and speaking like really badly of people that would leave. There and there wouldn't be one person that left on like a, a good note, or with like a party of like, oh, they're doing their next thing. Even
Interesting.
someone that was just like, I'm done with this season and I want to go like travel in Europe. You'd kind of, and some of it was really forward and like very rude or kind of mean things would be said. And then some was kind of like the like passing side comments where you're like, their name comes up and then like one little half a sentence is said and you could almost not even catch it or be aware. But you're
Hmm.
like, oh, what was that? Some little remark. And so those are the kinds of things where, again, you're just kind of, the one that's really straightforward. You're like, that must have been a intense, something bad must have happened.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe Sean's kind of speaking freely about it. Maybe like I'm the person, or this like small private setting is where he can really just share how he feels, because everywhere else he's speaking honorably, or he
Right.
um, give the details, or so you're because again, I'm in very close proximity to Sean at this point. So we're talking about like sitting around campfires, or like at his dinner table, or like in the car on a trip while driving to an airport. So like this is real life, real relationship. People's names come up. You know, um, I remember one time I was in Connecticut with Sean, and I was like, "Oh, we're going through like so and so's hometown." Like it told him to come to the worship event, and Sean just kind of has this weird look on his face, like, "Oh, that person," and I'm not knowing any of the past
Yeah.
fallout that happened or something till years later, and now I'm like, "Oh, that's why like I got a weird response when I said something about that," or
Yeah. So in essence,
yeah,
Richie, yeah. No, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say there was just always a culture of talking badly about people after they left.
Wow.
Like, oh, they weren't cut out for this. They can't keep the pace.
Hmm.
They went woke. They went liberal. They don't love God enough. They, you know, he would always rag on like men at BSSM and be like they're all just too feminine, and so he just kind of very critical. And
Yeah.
if people left, he had some critical opinion of why they left.
So in essence, it's like anybody that's with him, if they don't stay with him forever, there would be a
Right.
story spun that was like, yeah, they're in danger, which puts you in a feeling of always thinking that all these people are falling away from the faith, when
Yeah.
most likely, I'm sure the reality is, of course, some people deconstruct or go do whatever. They're trying to figure out their faith. But probably the
Yeah.
majority of people that left the ministry are just normal people that kept their faith but just went a different direction in ministry and life. And but it does do quite the number on new people that come in when they hear these types of narratives, like, oh man, all these people that used to be with Sean are now deconstructing their faith. We got to stay close to Sean and follow the Lord in the middle of, this movement that God's doing through Sean's ministry. And we're at the tip of the
Right.
spear. And if we leave the tip of the spear, we're going to be woke and liberal, and we might all turn gay. Who knows? Anyway, but yeah, um, but like, yeah, that's it's just interesting to hear kind of that. And I'm sure you've talked to others through this process. Have you kind of heard similar narratives from those that were riding with Sean and close to Sean over the time?
Yeah, I would say like my experiences are very very shared. And when I point out things to other people that worked with him,
Yeah.
there's pretty, it's a shared experience that we can all kind of relate back to, and be
Yeah.
like, oh, I didn't quite see this at the time or see it for the full extent of what it was. And
Yeah.
that's what really, got me, is seeing this pattern. In the moment you're just giving grace or thinking something's a one-off situation, or that there's more to there's got to be more to the story here. But I started seeing patterns where people that getting into like 2022, 2023, 24, I'm kind of I about the end of 22, um, into my official engagement with Light a Candle at some point, passed it off to the next bookkeeper, and I was just going a different direction. Got married, a different business. I still live in Reading. Never like had an abrupt or official ending with Burn, or like my connection or involvement to Sean. Um, Up until the Truth and Freedom Stories website went live, I still had, admin level access and an email in the Burn organization. That got pulled the day the website went live, but I'm still on the Burn checking account, as we talked about. But I didn't have like a, hey, I'm gonna quit and do something else, because Burn was never like my full time job. So it was just
Yeah.
kind of, I'm doing other stuff to pay the bills, and Burn's like a little something I help with admin stuff. If someone needed a new email, or they launch a Burn in a new city, it's like, hey, send them a logo, send them a email address, all of those kinds of little things. I would help out with those kind of details. But because I never had a direct ending, and I was still connected in the culture of Sean's world, I still maintained relationship with like the new people that would work for him, and they would call me sometimes with questions or different things, and then I would also be there, kind of counseling, talking people through like their decisions to leave the organization, or they're like wrestling with like kind of the dysfunction dysfunction at best, and like spiritual abuse, emotional abuse at financial abuse at worst.
Mm-hmm.
And so talking with people through those things, and after enough stories that were actually other people, is when I started to see it. It wasn't from my own
Yeah.
experience that I'm like, hey, red flag, this is all, I wouldn't have ever from my own story used the term spiritual abuse. Like I thought I was pretty close with Sean. Like we were tight, like he'd like request that I drive with him, because I was like, I don't need to be like best friends with him. I don't need to talk his ear off, or like tell him what I'm excited about, or tell him my like latest revelation from God, or and I'm not knocking people that would be excited to talk to him, because that's valid too. But I viewed my place as like, hey, this guy's tired. He's doing a lot. I'm just here to help.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just driving him to the next city or the next thing. You know, and he would like laugh at my jokes, or we'd like have, I'd say something funny, and he'd laugh at it. Like we had so many good times and memories together, and like our travels and different things. And, I had no reason to like think personally like, oh, I've been abused or treated horribly. But when I started hearing other people's stories, I couldn't deny the like facts of what I was facing, and I couldn't also not start to piece it together and be like, oh, actually, there were abusive things that were happening, inside of all the pieces of the organizations that I was connected to, because again, this is the culture that gets created around Sean
So,
everywhere.
and
Anything
you've said
he
that
touches.
twice now. You said that twice. So, like the culture that was created around Sean, and so obviously, and your story is very normal in the sense that people can be treated a certain way and kind of just take it. But then as soon as you see
Yeah,
people you care about treated a certain way, you're like, wait, stop that. And then all of a sudden they're like, but you're
right.
being treated that way too. You're like, oh, wait, hold on. Okay. And then all of a sudden
Hmm.
there's a common thread. So what would you say is like the common thread that you saw the most? If you can be specific to a certain extent, that'd be great. Obviously you can't share other people's
Yeah,
stories, um,
yeah.
but
I'd
yeah, talk
say
about tactics or the culture surrounding him that, so give people a picture that are going, what is this? What's going on around there?
a a big one was just people not being taken care of, um, in a variety of ways. But I mean, financial would be a big one. I um, one of my friends worked for one of his organizations, and he was a full time employee that was, a salaried employee. Sean didn't salary many people. That's a kind of another thing that's on the website, the 1099 abuse. But one person that was, that was salaried, he would be paying his own way to go to like lighted candle trips. And I was kind of like, hey, why why are you paying for something? In my accounting background, most of my clients that were a business, when employees travel, you're like getting reimbursements or you're using like a
Mm-hmm.
corporate card or something. And then, just kind of questioning like, hey, why is that not covered? When I worked at a church, I didn't have to rent my own car. I didn't have to pay for my own flights or, so just asking some questions and then seeing people not paid well. Um, and again, I thought Sean's just too busy. He's too like in tune with God and too busy like thinking about the next song or book or revelation or like spiritual thing to be aware of these kind of natural things.
Wow.
So when I saw them, I just kind of turned a blind eye and was like, he just doesn't know better. And
Mm.
there were times where I would approach Sean and try to like offer or lend my strength in these areas, and kind of be like, hey, you're not. But and here was the problem: resource wasn't the limiting factor. You know,
Okay.
if it wasn't like Sean being like, oh yeah, I want to take care of the people on the team, but we don't have the resources for
Cash
that.
in the
There
bank
was
was not the limiting factor,
yeah,
is what you're saying. Yeah.
right. So it wasn't, if there was something, a job that need I'm being anecdotal here, but like if there was a job that needed to be done, Sean would rather use 10 volunteers than like pay a professional to come do it.
Hmm.
And, and there's so many factors into that and
It's
his own
interesting.
mentality.
I heard that actually prior to these stories coming out. I heard like months and months ago. I heard something like that about volunteers being utilized to help, you know, around like build one of the houses or construction on one of the
Yeah.
houses or something like that. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then in some ways, was it pitched like, well, you guys are serving the Lord, basically, or like, is that kind of the idea how people can just like not want proper payment, or how did he pitch it, or did you hear him pitch it in certain ways? I mean, you do have an email chain to him about the same type of thing, so
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. The movements itself didn't ever need pitching. They sold themselves. People signed up for Burn. They signed up for Light a Candle. They signed up for Let Us Worship, not because of Sean, but because of like what God was doing. I mean, I've been on mission trips around the world, on teams and seeing God do amazing things. I've been in so many Let Us Worship events where like, especially during COVID, it was like, hey, not a lot of other people are doing this right now,
Mm-hmm.
and it's kind of like you give an offering to God of worship and like he'll meet you there. So like things were happening. And so again, people wanted to be involved and they didn't,
Yeah.
there's never been a lack of like finding people that want to be involved. And so I think where Sean would manipulate that, like say if I'll give another example, I won't use names, but Sean would have a band member that like, you know, band members are usually and they can go the opposite end and be like, we've all seen the entitled worship leader, but they're used to being treated like a certain way
Yeah.
of like having a hotel and food and a ride and different things. And so I started quickly noticing on these lettuce worship trips, like the guitar player can't even get his thing to the stage in time to tune. I'm like renting a car to like take care of him. Another friend was like, this lady, she was like, "Oh, I saw the team like not having like waters or being fed, so I'm like taking people and buying them food." And again, in the moment, you're like, "Hey, this is just a blind spot." Like Sean's like just not aware.
Mm.
But then you would start to find out that Sean is aware, and he'd hear some like band member, let's just say it's a guitarist, complain about not, you know, having what they need, or being paid properly or on time or whatever. And Sean would just kind of be like, they say they're not going to come back. They'll be at the next one. I'll call them for the next event, and they'll want to be there.
Wow. Wow.
Basically, using the the clout and kind of the momentum of like, none of these musicians, or you could extend it to like, none of these volunteers are going to want to miss the move of God. So he wouldn't directly say it to people, but it was well, at least that I overheard personally, firsthand account.
Hmm.
It wasn't like in that sense lorded over, but it was like this attitude of like, Sean's like, I know people care about what God's doing, and so that's what will get them. But
And so
he would use that.
it's kind of like, hey, this guy's complaining that he didn't get enough money, or that this situation was like not set up well, and he's
Hmm.
saying he can't come back because he can't be treated this way or this, that, or the other. But I know he'll be
Right.
back because, quote, God is moving here, and look at
Yeah.
the crowds, look at the opportunity. Why would he miss this opportunity? He'll be back.
Right.
Versus making it right or addressing it. And
Yeah.
just to get down to the bare bones of it, because I know our listeners, and I know there's people that are just going to go, so like brass tacks. I mean, are you telling me that there's people that were working that should have been paid and compensated, and weren't at all, or should have been compensated better, and there was financial resources in the bank? Because just a reminder for everybody, Richie still can see the bank account as of the last month. I guess you've been able to still see, light a candle and have access to that. So there.
Just burn.
Oh, I'm
Just
sorry.
burn.
Just burn. Okay,
Yeah.
just burn. Um,
Hmm.
but you saw hundreds of thousands of dollars available in cash assets in just one account at, I mean, I don't know if you're comfortable saying that, or if that's, if is that the truth of the matter, when people had to go rent their own car to get their amps to the
Yeah,
events,
there
or.
were, there were that the again. I didn't see Sean Feucht Ministries, but I'll give you another kind of anecdotal example. I would be carrying backpacks full of cash off of a stage for some of the Let Us Worship events, and I was not an employee of Let Us Worship. I was not a on staff for Let Us Worship officially. I was kind of an ex Sean intern. When I say ex, like former alumni, whatever you want
Yep.
to call it. And just, you know, if you're in one, I say this a lot, if you're in one of Sean's worlds, you're in all of them. So,
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of officially through my own LLC connected to Light a Candle. I'm through kind of a still official, but not as large of an engagement connected to Burn 24/7. But I'm right there in Sean's world. So I'm like driving Sean, picking up band members, bringing people food, helping out with just anything and everything.
On your own
Facebook.
dime,
Yeah, yeah. I was paying my own way around the country for
and
lettuce.
doing stuff for other band members that are doing Let Us
Yeah,
Worship stuff. You're like buying them meals and stuff like that. Now, would you send receipts in and get like reimbursed for this type of stuff, or did band members get reimbursed, or?
there. And I'll make this point too. The it wasn't like Sean never covered anything. You'd have this, he'd like take everyone for like an amazing steak dinner or something, and like kind of celebrate or whatever. But then something else trivial, like you couldn't get resources to like cover. So I'd be
Gotcha.
taking backpacks of the offering off stage sometimes, for Let Us Worship, and then not like know, because I was paying my own way and kind of, I just finished ministry school, so most of my time was going to all of Sean's worlds, and like not knowing how I was going to pay for, myself a hotel that night, and just being like, I kind of saw it from like a problem solving standpoint, where I was like, I could solve problems for Sean that are coming up, with this event more effectively if I wasn't stressed out about like where I'm going to stay. And,
Right.
and sometimes, to be fair, like, because I want to be totally fair and honest in this, you know, 50% of the time I did have a host home, and a church that was partnering with the event, like, took people in, housed them, moved them around. But I was still finding myself in a lot of scenarios where I was just like, I could work more be a more effective volunteer here if I had access to things. And it wasn't like I didn't have, I mean, I had Sean's credit cards. Um, like, I would be calling hotels and putting down his card number with like a room block.
Like
So it wasn't
for
like I'm just a distant volunteer and don't have access and it wouldn't be appropriate for me. Like, I had all the access and the direct kind of connection needed. Um, there was one time I bought a keyboard, like on the way to an event, like a little MIDI controller keyboard
hmm
crashed because of the heat. And I went to Guitar Center and I bought a new one on my own dime, 200 or 300 bucks. And I submitted that later to Sean for a receipt. And I had to fight like really hard to convince him to like refund me. And he was basically like, no, take it back to Guitar Center and return it. And I was like, well, we're not in, whatever city. I think it was Boston. We're not like at that Guitar Center. We don't even have a Guitar Center in Reading. I don't even have the keyboard anymore. The like keyboard player took it. Like, it got packed up. And just being like, Sean has millions of dollars in the bank. Why am I fighting for $300 that I spent of my own money to, like, I was like racing back to get it on stage before like the event started.
wow.
So things like that, where you're just like, why am I being put in situations where, you know, I'm not kind of taken care of the way like you would be in an, I would say, like a normal organization or a normal church.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting, Richie. I mean, that's that statement. Sean has millions of dollars in the bank, and why am I having to fight for a $300 reimbursement for something that I bought on my own dime for the purpose of his worship event, so his keyboard player
Yes,
could play? It's
exactly.
it's interesting, and some would say, well, that's just a shrewd business owner or a shrewd businessman or somebody that's financially, fiscally responsible for the purpose of this, that, or the other. But at the end of the day, it's hurting your own volunteer or ministers' wallets that are in your ministry organization. So it's not just somebody saying like, you're literally hurting the people that are serving your ministry. So I don't see it as fiscally, like, incredibly fiscally responsible. I see it as irresponsible toward the people that are having to dish out the money for rental cars and all these things. So I'm just saying that to say I know how people respond to this stuff in some senses, because if there's a situation in a ministry these days that's not just blatant SA, then sometimes people have a hard time seeing through the noise to see the
Right.
mistreatment and the misuse and the spiritual abuse. And we're not over here going, oh, look, we're all victims or something like that. That's not what we're trying to say. We're just looking and going, there's a problem, and there's a trail of people that have these stories that worked and volunteered their lives. And I'm sure you have, now that you've said, because you said earlier, you said, I started talking to lots of different people when I was in Reading. Are you still talking to people? And can you give us like a picture of what those stories sound like? Because people are coming to you now with their stories. Can you give us a picture of what those stories are like?
Yeah. And what you said earlier about the shrewd businessman, that's what I thought too. I was just like, Sean's a businessman, and that example with the keyboard, I was like, I'm honored to be the one that, buys a keyboard for Sean. And if he doesn't pay me back, like, I believe in what we're doing and I'll chalk it up to like just, again, the dysfunction. But it has been in the talking to other people and hearing their stories, I would say both in real time when I was still actively involved. You, I'm great with people, very pastoral. I would kind of get the fallout of people that would be crying, and and particularly women a lot, that Sean would kind of, I would call it now, bullying women. And they and he'd just say they're being dramatic, and he'd kind of, again, like we talked earlier, like he'd poke fun of it or press their buttons. And you'd start to be like, that just wasn't like a bit mean, or like that's actually like bullying type behavior. And
Can you
I
give me an
wouldn't.
example? Like, because you've said this, and I think I heard this somewhere else too,
Yeah.
but it's treatment of women in particular, because that's kind of an intense statement. So, can you give me an example, like, of one or two things even that you heard? Or obviously, you don't want to like uncover somebody's actual story to put them in a
Yeah.
position of being, you know, under the gun from Sean. But I don't know if
he
there's a way
kind
you
of
can. Yeah, go ahead.
he'd kind of pride himself on like having like really high performers around him.
Mm-hmm.
And being like, I get basically the best of the best. And um I get people that can perform at a really high level. And then he'd kind of like hold that over them, of just like, oh, you're not cut out enough for this, or you got to grind, or you got to really want this, um type kind of, so jostling people between this, like talking him up, and and being like, yeah, we get the best of the best people, around, he'd say this, around us, working with us. And they just crush it. And but then kind of poke fun of them when they would start to have normal human limitations, or need to sleep, or want to take a break, or
Mm.
you know Sean would expect people to work through holidays. If it was like a normal holiday that you'd get off if you had a corporate job, he'd just expect you to work right on through.
Hmm.
Any kind of people needing just a break after these intense ministry moments, or that would kind of be made fun of. People's like journey with like relationships, or being single, would be kind of poked fun at. And again, you thought it was like in good fun, and it was like, big brother kind of, like, hey, I'm kind of poking fun at this, but really deep down I care. And I'm actually praying like you meet someone. And like I want to believe and think that that part was true. But you'd look at it and you'd be like, man, this might be a really vulnerable place for you know someone's journey. um and he'd kind of just have the little like funny prodding question sometimes. Maybe someone just had a breakup, and then he'd kind of be like, what's happening, with your boy in this whatever city, or whatever, and
Sure.
kind of just say things to that were a bit mean. But I think the again, that's stuff where, like you said, if it's not like straight like clear essay, it's like you just chalk it up to like Sean's got this certain personality, or he's just the way he is.
Mm-hmm.
But in the pattern after pattern where you're like sitting down with people and like hearing how they were treated, or how they were put in situations where they didn't have adequate resources to handle something, like Cassandra's video is public and online.
Yeah,
um you know
I
she'd
watched that
often be
video.
just like she'd often just be left to like handle like way more merch than is humanly possible for one person to like carry the boxes, or you know
And I think I
situations
remember in that video she said that she was hired to actually work. She was being paid, but then
being paid. Yeah.
she was being required to work more than what was agreed upon. And then when she asked for the
Yeah.
payment for the extra hours that she was required to work, they said no. They continued to pay her for the limited hours that they had agreed upon, even though they forced her to work more hours, which is just, honestly, it's just kind of like, it's just strange. Like, it's like a very, and I feel like in this kind of like 501c3 ministry world where there's volunteerism, and I understand it because like there were years that I worked for free for certain ministries as a young person, 18, 19 years old. And when I look back, I have no qualms with it because it was like a
Right.
very impacting time and this, that, and the other. But also I wasn't taken advantage of based on, hey, you will be paid this, and then not getting paid that, and then just like, well, this is just God's call, and we're, while that minister has millions in the bank, when they could have given these people. So
Right.
I'm just looking at this whole picture that's being painted where she was treated that way and not just simply not paid. I mean, let's call it what it is. She's not paid properly. That is bad business.
There
And
would be
some, yeah, go ahead.
a lot of people Sean would put on, like, he would call it a stipend, you know, and be like, "Oh, you're gonna get like maybe $2,000 a month to do all of this," and it works out to this kind of an hourly rate at this
Mm,
many hours. But then that he gets just a flat payment he can make over and over, and
yeah,
then people are working way more hours
that
than
makes
ever
sense.
anticipated. And so, and yeah, people were not, California's got some strict laws. A lot of people weren't hired officially as like a proper employee. He liked to keep people as 1099s. And some people could say that's just, oh, Sean doesn't know, it's a bit nitpicky, but he knew. He was very intentionally like doing that to avoid having to pay the payroll tax that employers pay,
Mm-hmm.
to have employees, and not cover things, like health insurance or like normal requirements that you would have to have for being a organization, a business, ministry.
Yeah, it's interesting. Do you think that like because it seems to me that Sean is the type of personality that is um, if you want to look at the strengths, it would be that type A, very driven, high level driven business personality, almost kind of like in the secular world. You look at all these guys that are like the business influencers at these super high
Yeah.
levels and make tons of money and do this, that, and the other. And they just kind of drive over people though, because like being in business myself for a number of years, when I was running an agency, I just remember I would listen to all these different people and these different mentors and these different ideas. And there came a point when I looked and I was like, I just don't know if I want to drive over people, because that's what seemed when I would look at the business world and the secular world, I'd be like, these people are driving over these people in order to meet their goals. And when they lose relationships, they literally forget about them. Like that was my experience in the business where I would watch people lose relationships and just forget about people, and people would try to teach me that same mindset. And over the years, I just thought I can't grasp that idea, because that's not Christ culture. That's like a different culture. That's something different. And so it seems that in ministry, the weakness of and I'm only saying this because I'm wondering if Sean is the type of person that would ever hear that and go, that's true. How many people are there that I had relationship with that rode in cars with me? Because I'm guessing for you, he's looking, well, yeah, we were close, but he's like a Judas or somebody that is backstabbing me. When really it's like, no, actually you just mistreated your friends. And they're still Christians. Richie's a Christian. He loves the Lord. He like spends time in prayer. He reads the word. Like he's
Yeah.
not a liberal or whatever you want to say that he would be, a
Right.
deconstructionist. I just wonder, what do you think, man? Do you think Sean would ever have an ear to hear, or is he just like so out in his own vision of his own ministry call? Like, and is he just going to keep burning bridges of people that come close to him, or?
I pray and hope he like does have an ear, like I think it'd be so cool if Sean like realized how he's affected people, cleaned up some messes, took a sabbatical, and I think God has like plans and purposes for Sean in the earth, and I think every strength is a double-edged sword. So Sean's like, I'm gonna stand out there in COVID and not care who thinks what about me or do anything. Like that's a double-edged sword. That same thing that can run over people can run over systems that need running over.
Mm,
Like it has to have some like wisdom and accountability around it where it can be um, channeled into the right direction. And
yeah.
so I think Sean feels, this is just my own opinion. I think he truly, I believe, like loves the Lord and is a Christian and, has a heart and feels like a pressure and a weight of like, I've never met anyone more driven, and almost as if it depends on him waking up, and like what God wants to do in the earth is on his shoulders. And that's where the drive, I think, comes from. Is just like, but it's unhealthy, and it even in seasons, and Sean will say, oh, we just have a grace to go at a pace that no one else can. Even if that's true and Sean has that grace, which I don't think that's actually always true, but I think that's like the drive thing happening
Mm-hmm.
for like approval from God, or to fulfill like God's purposes in his life in the earth. But um, that grace isn't on every single person around you all the time, and it does run people over, and it does burn people out.
Mm. Yeah, that's a great point. As a leader, you've got you've got this high level like push, and and it's you said it in a great way when in the sense that his kind of like bent toward um, well, people are telling us we can't gather and worship because of COVID. Well, guess what? We're going to do it, and we're going to do it outside, and we're going to do it all over the country. You know, this kind of attitude, which I'm not even saying that's a like my political views on that whole season of our nation. Like, I love that there was outdoor worship happening and churches that were, and I'm not just talking about 501c3s like Let Us Worship. I'm talking about actual churches that said, no, let's still gather together and worship
Right.
Jesus. Like, but like places where they said you can't sing. It's the strangest thing to me. I'm like, you can't tell a church they can't sing. That's just so silly. So you got this guy that's like going, no, we're going to do this, but then pushing so hard that eventually you push and you do the same thing to your own people. So when they're speaking up, you're going, oh no, we're just going to keep going. Almost like we'll run over the secular society that's telling us to be quiet.
Mhm.
And oh, if you're going to speak up against what I feel God's called me to do, I'm going to run over you too. Or we're going to leave you in the dust and call you woke, liberal,
Yeah.
deconstructionist, atheist, no
Hmm.
longer passionate about God, whatever you want to call it. So anyway, I mean, I'm asking you that question because I do think there's this feeling in this environment now in the church. And I know you're a listener to our podcast. You know, I met you and your wife Esther on here earlier, and you guys are listening to some of the book club, the Something's Not Right, spiritual abuse, and just the cultures that are created. You got to look at the fruit of these lives that are in the wake, and somebody eventually has to stop. Even if you're a high level ministry leader, whatever, you have to eventually stop and take account and go, hold on, like what's the effect on the people that are closest to me, not the people, because the people on the off the stage, I mean, dude, you can have hundreds of thousands of people that just sing your praises, but if the people
Hmm.
closest to you over the last decade, who are the people that were at your right and left hand over the last decade, and are they still there? And like, what is that relationship like? What is their testimony of your interaction with them? And is it a Christ-like testimony? Is it a Christ-like experience? Or is it like, yeah, he feels really called, but man, he just like is not good with people. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, like, or he's just not good with it. Like it, or, and then you go to the other side with the money thing. And that's where I'm concerned too, because obviously not everybody's like perfect with knowing how to handle all their money or all the time or something, but it sounds like it's bigger than that, right, Richie? It sounds like it's worse than just, oh, there's a little bit of like, oh, they should have done better with this, that, or the other. It sounds like on the financial side, it could even be like kind of shady. Is that what I'm understanding from your understanding of things as a bookkeeper?
Yeah, I would say it seemed like, for the most part, Burn and Light a Candle were like pretty legitimate, and then, Sean Feucht Ministries is kind of, especially with the going dark of not having 990s and reclassifying himself as a church, and you see all the parsonages and the millions of dollars there. I mean, in my personal um, time with Sean, you would always see him being very well taken care of, which I have no problem with. I'm like, man, if you're a pastor and you want to have a jet, you want to have really nice homes, I'm super for those things. Like, jet's going to help you reach more people more effectively. Like, it's an efficiency play, you know, nice house. It's important to have a sanctuary and a place of peace. So I'm not like an anti prosperity, or, I'm not someone that's like, hey, no pastor should have nice things. I'm like, man,
Sure.
that's awesome. Like, great. But, from my observation of a lot of years directly connected to Sean, I can definitely say there's like private and personal benefit from all of his ministry activity that, again, like a more kind of structured organization would have a clear delineation,
Hmm.
and and he kind of he makes anything to content, and anything is because he's this influencer and has such an online presence. It's like, well, it's so gray. Everything's quote unquote ministry. I'm you know hunting for the Lord or whatever. Um,
It's like I killed this deer and God showed me this, and
yeah,
here's a piece of content.
yeah,
So
I
it's a
was
it's a write
yeah, I was
off.
in. Yeah, exactly. And so there's things where you're like, hey, there's probably some stuff there that Sean probably feels justified in of like, hey, we're working really hard and doing all this over here. Sean's like, I do more than anyone, for Jesus, basically.
Hmm.
And arguably, and maybe in some seasons, that could be true sometimes. What potentially, and then but then yeah, on the side of like personal financial benefit, there's more stuff on the website with, I won't go into it here, but with like all the real estate and financial stuff where um i I do believe there's a pretty clear trail of money flowing into assets that he's benefiting from, personally. Kind of more like what I would see with like with Light a Candle is a lot of dysfunction where you're like, man, the way money's being moved around, the way it's being categorized, the way you know you could kind of just say like, oh, Sean's like the founder that's just reckless and like just putting everything on the card. And you know, then like 2 years into the founder journey, an accountant comes and is like, "You got to like clean this all up and be organized." It's like
Hmm.
Sean never had that. So I remember when I first started with Light a Candle, I think some of the other kind of team members, I didn't directly interact with Sean on everything. I interacted with some other team members. I sent a list of maybe 20 things that I'm like, hey, and this was a place of care. Like, I don't want Light a Candle to be audited. I don't want you to come under fire. These are like concerns I have that are, legitimate, and this could look shady. And, there were things like, I was trying, I think this is quoted on the website too, the whole time my time bookkeeping, I was telling Sean, we need to account for your American Express card transactions. And like, he refused to give me login access so I could link that account to QuickBooks and properly categorize that. And he was, basically just directing and saying, just say it's all travel. And I'm like, okay, $10,000 $20,000 a month on an Amex card, that could be like some travel. I know you get the flight benefits and the points and all that, but like, I know there's stuff on there that's not like, especially because Sean wasn't in all the day to day of Light a Candle, but yet still spending the Light a Candle card. So that's like a
Huh.
very clear example, something where I'm like, hey, this needs to be better tracked. And I did pass on to the future accountant of like, hey, this is a concern I've had and something I've tried to raise. And I think eventually they did, you know mitigate that, and there were things that improved. And I put a lot of structures in place when I left my time with Light a Candle. I was like, we are so much cleaner and more organized than we used to be. But that's the thing where it's like, Sean is not incompetent. So I think the chaos and dysfunction puts everyone in a state where they're just responding to chaos. And then that's where like fraud and things can kind of exist, because the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing. All
Mm,
these
yeah.
employees think, I'm working for a ministry and they don't have a budget to pay me. I'm working 40 hours a week, but they can only pay me 20. But me as the bookkeeper, I'm like, you've got hundreds of thousands of dollars just sitting in a savings, like not being utilized. You could afford to pay people, or like the website would need like an upgrade. It wouldn't be working. And I'm like, why not spend the money to fix
Mm,
the problem? So
yeah.
things like that are, again, we've kind of talked about a few times. Sean just not wanting to use resources. So again, because the mission and everyone cared about the mission, whether it be let us worship, kids around the world or overseas teams and trips, everyone would show up and be put in positions where they were taking on way more burden and responsibility than they would need to if kind of the high level decision making from Sean was um, done differently.
Yeah. Okay, so from my understanding and listening to you here, it sounds like something you said a bit ago. If people would say, okay, well, where does this go, and what is the hope, and what's the goal, and what do you all from truthandfreedomstories.com want to see? What would you want to see? Because this isn't like talking about a former ministry that used to exist,
Right.
and hey, here's our story. It was rough or whatever. But this is like, or even terrible or abusive. But like this is like currently, this is the story of the last decade plus of people stories, and then that's still happening right now. There's probably still people that are experiencing things right
Mhm.
now. So you said, man, it'd be great if he would listen and maybe take a sabbatical and set aside and make some changes and adjustments, and even maybe have some repentance toward people
Yeah.
in his life. Like, and because it's not like you're saying like he's disqualified from ministry and he should never minister again and God's not with him or there's no call in his life or any of that. You're saying there really needs to be some major adjustments, or possibly this could lead to something worse. I don't know. Can you just speak to that? Like, what do you guys want to see? What do you think this is going? What are the possibilities that are good? What are the possibilities that are bad on the outcomes here?
Yeah, my biggest hope and outcome is that people that see patterns of dysfunction and unhealth and abuse would actually feel emboldened to speak up and say something. I've talked to a lot of people that have known Sean in multiple states, even multiple countries, people that have interacted with him, and 9 out of 10 responses I get from people or short stories people share with me, they're like, "This is textbook Sean. I'm not surprised by any of this." Everyone is just like, this is just how Sean is, and you know, people are going to just continue to be hurt, and people are going to continue to be abused and taken advantage of. And I want to see that culture that in the church that, just looks at the fruit, just looks at the let us worship outside with 30,000 people, and then turns away from what they know about how Sean operates. I want to see the church be held to a higher standard of accountability of how people are treated, and avenues and pathways for feedback and concerns to be, given a voice.
Got it. That's good. And then what do you see as do you see like possible negative outcome here, like for light a candle or burn or let us worship or Sean individually if he doesn't hear and make adjustments with this?
Absolutely. Like, I think every single person, um, like sin in our own life affects people around us. And so, I think if Sean's ever found of like fraudulent dealings with money, that would affect the people around him. That would affect his family. That would affect, you know, um, his ministries, and that's a consequence as a leader that he will have to bear. That the people and the organizations he's created um, will be affected.
Yeah. Which ultimately affects the big vision that he feels so passionate about. That vision will not continue to be accomplished if he doesn't deal with the rising voices here, because in my understanding, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that since this website went live almost a month ago, there's more and more stories being submitted and more people coming to you guys and talking to yourself, Christy, and others, and I guess even Jesse now, of people reaching out. So yeah, it's interesting as I'm listening to all these stories and hearing this. Something that was a red flag to me, because I even had some of our listeners be like, we had one person say, "Well, I'm disappointed in this channel now because you took on this story. It's different. Sean's different, etc. And I'm just going, the one thing that really stuck out to me, and I know it stuck out to Christina too, but Christina's always had a red flag about Sean actually for a couple years. Me, not so much until about a year ago. The first red flag was when knowing he came from the prayer movement and was unwilling to give a very strong call out to Mike Bickle.
Yeah.
And he still says, well, I did. And I'm like, no, you didn't, dude. No, you didn't. There was that was bad, but, it's like these guys, they can't just give a strong, it's kind of like, anybody in the charismatic movement, I hate to say, whether it's people that are embroiled in controversy themselves or people that seem to not be, like Chris Valentin said, I love Mike Bickle. And I'm like, I'm glad you love that man, but can you just say that man's a predator? Can you just say it, like that, like Rick Joyner, over here saying Mike Bickle's best days are ahead. I'm like going, wait, what are you talking about? So many in the charismatic movement have such a hard time just calling a spade a spade. And so I saw that with Sean. I went, well, that's a red flag. Come on, man. Like, show up and speak the truth, please. But then when this starts to come up, the second big red flag was when he came on his live 3 weeks ago and lied. He actually said, none of these people know our day-to-day, nor do they know our finances.
Of course, they don't know anything about our organization. They know nothing about our day-to-day. They know nothing about our financial situation. They're just regurgitating what Rolling Stone and all these other hack jobs are saying.
And I went, there is one person named Richie Booth that has access to one of your bank accounts right now. So what happened to me in that moment, Richie, was I went, if he's willing to look in this camera and lie to his entire audience about this, that shows a really bad sign of character. And it makes me go, we should not be able to trust that person. That is a blatant lie. And I'll probably throw that video right here, just a clip in, just to remind people of what he said, because this is Richie Booth. He ran with Sean, and he was one of Sean's, he had access to the burn accounts. Even in the last, few weeks, he's had access to the accounts.
Yeah.
So it's, that was the biggest red flag for me to go, okay, I'm going to listen to these stories. So for all of our audience out there that wants to say like, oh, you got no evidence of this, that, I'm like, well, the man's blatantly lying to a whole country that's following him on his online. So I'm going to listen to these people now. Now that I know this man is willing to just blatantly twist the truth to save his own ministry or whatever, now it's time to like give platform to these people. And I can, I can tell spiritual abuse now pretty easily when people start talking. I'm like, okay, these people have been through it with this person. And, so I'm glad you came on the platform. I'm glad you came on the podcast. Anything you want to say here, we're coming up on a little over an hour and 15 minutes, but anything else that you would like to bring to the table, the last 3 to 5 minutes is yours. Just anything you want to say to Sean, to the listeners, to any other stories you want to tell, or just anything else you want to add.
Yeah, I think one last kind of thing where I started to really, probably the first red flag for me, was in Let Us Worship, because to go all the way back to the culture of Burn 24/7, a core value was, family is what sustains revival. We would always like shorten it and say like fam sus rev, hashtag. And I started seeing this breakdown where because in my first couple years with Sean, like we'd go hard on the ministry side, and then we'd go pretty hard on the hanging out and having fun together, and dinners and sitting by fires and talking and like the joking around and stuff. And so it felt like there's community, there's family, this is like a core value. But where I really started seeing that break down is in Let Us Worship. It's taken off, and suddenly there's no time for like any connection. And I'm not just saying like me, like, oh, I need to have, a certain amount of like time with Sean or something like that. But I'm just saying the dynamic in the team, like any kind of time to connect or pray together or worship together or share a meal, you'd still have the occasional like big kind of victory dinner at the end of something like a Washington, D.C. Let Us Worship, But in the day-to-day, I saw that culture evaporate. and it was mission over people. And that's the culture. That's like, simply put, that's what it comes down to. That is Sean Feucht, like, what, and there were other ways that was present back then. I just, I'm giving that the first season, like, the benefit of the doubt in a lot of ways, but it was revealed when the pressure's there, and the ministry's opportunities are really right there in front of you. That's more important than people and taking care of them, and that creates the culture that I talked about, of dysfunction, and where people are not taken care of, and abuse, and that's what I want to see change.
Yeah. Yeah, man. Well, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that it's not just a call out to Sean Feucht Ministries, but it's to the charismatic movement as a whole. And we've got to turn away from this mission over people mentality and the
Mm-hmm.
superstar number one gun on the stage type of mentality that they can just run the whole show and rip through people and kind of leave people bloodied and bruised and broken. And see, like, we've got to see the fruit of people's ministries, not just in the people that have been in the crowds, but the people that have been behind the scenes consistently with these people. And so, yeah, that's what we're seeing with truthandfreedomstories.com, is we're hearing the real stories. And I know for sure there's people that have had positive experiences with Sean. It's going to be, there's always going to be mixed stories. But when you have, like Christy said, she said, I have 42 people. I have 42 stories. This is Christy Gafford. She said, I have 42 stories of mistreatment or spiritual abuse. And I'm going, what? Like, I could understand if you got one or two staff members that have gone through a hard time with a minister, and there's going to be issues. There's always going to be mistakes made, and restitution has to happen, and apologies, and this, that, and the other. But when you got 42 stories from one person at her level, and I know that you've got a handful, probably, 5, 10 plus, because of the type of pastoral person you are and people coming to you and Reading about this. So this is a wake-up call to the body of Christ, to the charismatic movement, that it's time to listen and not just call people church hurt or deconstructionists or whatever you want to call them, but it's time to listen to these stories. And because this is only going to continue with Sean Feucht. This is not going away. And it's not just from what we're hearing now, but there's things apparently behind the scenes that can't even be spoken as of yet. So this is not going away. So we just want to appeal, hopefully, to Sean that he would deal with these things. And have you had a conversation with Sean in the last year or two, or has he tried to reach out to you about any of this? Or
No, I've not had a one-on-one conversation with him in the last year. But I kind of stopped most of my involvement with everything in probably about a year and a half ago. And again, that was like, I was just going a different direction
yeah,
in life, but still on all the admin, access to things, and never had like an official ending. I think the last interaction I had with Sean, outside of a quick personal one at a wedding, was him. He forgot that I ever did accounting with Burn 24/7, and was like, "What is this? Why are we paying you $100 a month?" And I was like, "It's the accounting for Burn," and he was like, "We don't need that." I was like, "Okay, we're done." Like, fine. I was like, "You still, whether you're having activity or not, like, you still do need to account for that, even if it's like one donor a month or one expense." But that's his prerogative to turn it off and on at his
wow.
his leisure. So
Okay,
I
this is
respect
reminding me
his
of
request.
another story that you shared, and I just want to I want to touch this here because this was important. But you sent me an email, and I don't know if
Mm-hmm.
that's something you're willing to share about, but just about the
Yes.
accounting
Yes.
cost that
Yeah.
he was paying you. It was more than $100 a month, from what I feel like you were showing me in that email, right? Like you were being paid it.
Yeah. That one's for Light a Candle, so
Okay,
different organization than Burn. The Yeah, for the record, I'll say that the $100 a month Burn arrangement was fair, and Burn was not much activity, and like my passion project, because I love Burn.
sure.
But for Light a Candle, it was more of a business engagement, and I think you can probably flash that email up here on the screen. You're totally welcome to
I'll
share
do
it.
that.
But
Yeah, in the edit. Yep.
basically, I was just, saying like, hey, this would be a reasonable rate for a nonprofit ministry at your revenue bracket. And in order to serve Light a Candle in the best way I can, like I was actually trying to give them more attention, and I knew all the inner workings, and they had worked with a previous accountant that didn't know anything about the to use Sean's line, the day to day
Mm-hmm.
operations. Like, but I was so involved, and I knew all the programs. I was going on trips, mission trips. I was very connected, and so that gave me a lot of insight into the accounting process. Also, the nowadays with most people use Stripe as a payment processor, and there was a lot of almost pulling on like my software development background, where you kind of needed like a software developer to like tidy up the data, and then an
Yep.
accountant to account for it in QuickBooks. And I had both of those, and so I was just really trying to pitch myself as like, hey, I'm the right person for this, but in order to give you the level of attention and care that it would take to, you know, handle this in a good way, I need this level of payment to give it that much attention. And it was just totally shot down. And Sean was basically like, you know, my Sean Feucht Ministries that has, 6 times the amount of transactions and the revenue, gets, I pay them like $400 a month, I think is what he responded. And it was that was just a common scenario where you'd take something to Sean, very reasonable request, and you wouldn't just be told like, hey, no, I'm sorry, we don't have the money right now, I want to, like, you are worth that, this is what you're asking for is valid, we're just a small nonprofit and can't really swing that right now. But it was actually like, this is absurd, I can get this done for free, or someone else will do this for much less.
Mm.
Again, that's like back to the band member thing of like, that guitarist, they'll be here next week. He's always kind of using his position to manipulate people into staying in um, transactional relationships that are benefiting Sean and not the other person. that's
Yeah. So I'm
that's where
seeing.
like that's where the manipulation comes in.
Yeah. So I'm seeing you're saying like, hey, well, I respect your desire to be frugal with the budget. My current pricing is already well below industry standards. Please see the below screenshot for average accounting services for nonprofits based on revenue. So anything between 500K of revenue to 1 million is anywhere from $800 to $2,000 a month. So the revenue for Light a Candle, you said, was between 2 and 3 million per year, and the
Yes,
average for that would be a minimum of 1,600 a month, and you were being paid what, like, was it $600 a month or
I think we were at 750.
750? Okay,
Yeah,
so
I was asking for more than
you're literally 50% below industry standard, and he's going,
right.
no, I'll find somebody to do it cheaper. And so
Yeah,
that he's got hundreds of thousands of dollars in certain bank accounts, and you know that there's other
right,
millions going through other bank accounts, and you're asking for a regular raise that could pay you for the work you're doing, which is the accounting work, which is important. And he's just going, no,
right.
that doesn't make any sense. So yeah, that's just,
Yeah,
it's a strange. I mean, if in some senses in the secular world you just call that like bad business, like it's actually not
mm,
good. It's not good. It's not just like, oh wow, look how frugal he is. It's actually like, you know, that's not good business. like I remember when we had an assistant running our insurance agency, and we never had a full operation. We were paying tons of staff, but we had one person, and I remember telling Christina, like, we got to pay this person enough so that they can live off of what we're paying them, so that they don't have to go do
right.
extra things. And there were times that actually put us in a tight spot, but it helped them not have to go do extra things, and they were able to give our company their full time. And so it's just such a backwards mentality to me to be like, oh, sorry, we'll go get it done for cheaper, especially when you're working with what you considered to be a friend, but apparently it wasn't. Apparently nobody's really a true friend. It's just kind of an opportunity. Everybody's an opportunity until they push back.
I think Cassandra also said this in her video. God has put amazing people in Sean's life and given him opportunity after opportunity to value them, and he's not taken any of the times around the mountain. He's been around it many times, and just continued the pattern of um, it's kind of I guess a pun, but like burning them.
Yeah. I think that's a good way to end it right there. And thanks for coming on, Richie. Thanks for sharing your story.
Yeah, man.
And I hope it gives people courage to number one, confront these systems, these patterns, and tell your story.
Yeah.
In hopes that people will truly. This is not a hey, let's just burn it all to the ground. This is really hopes that, like, for Sean, if Sean would just come out and be like, "Whoa, I didn't know that the last 15 years of running hard in ministry, I was actually treating people this way, financially, spiritually, emotionally. I didn't realize that I was treating people this way." And, it's not like Sean has to admit every single person's story is that. I don't know. I think people just take this overboard where, like, a guy like Sean, it's not like he has to look at everything and go, "Oh yeah, I'm just so terrible." It's what he has to do is go, "Okay, I need to hear each story. I need to hear the things and take responsibility for the things that are real." And that's not that hard to do. I think about like the Dr. Michael Brown situation, and I think about Michael Brown, and I think about Bob Gladstone. I don't know if you know who Bob Gladstone is, but he was like one of Michael Brown's main people, right-hand men at Fire School of Ministry. High-level dude. And all the former BSM and Fire School of Ministry people have high respect for Bob Gladstone. Well, Bob Gladstone broke fellowship with Michael Brown over a year ago based on Michael Brown's dealings with IHOP Kansas City and some other things. He went, "This is not right." Well, Bob Gladstone looks back at, even in the conversation about the Haiti orphanage and some different things, Bob Gladstone has reached out personally to some of these different people and said, "Oh my gosh, I wish I would have looked at this differently or this differently. I wish I would have done this differently." And like, sometimes that's all people need. If you got a phone call from Sean Feucht in a couple days and he said, "Hey dude, I just didn't realize I was being a jerk." I mean, it's not like, yeah. So sorry, I'm on a soapbox here, but I mean, in the situation of SA and criminal activity towards people, it's a different world. But in a situation of emotional manipulation and patterns of spiritual abuse or mistreatment of employees, like, that's a different category. It's painful, it's hard, it's actually pretty traumatic. But if people would come with a genuine apology and a genuine recognition of some wrongs versus saying everyone's woke except for me. It's kind of like the impression we get. Everybody's woke. Everybody's voting for Biden except for me. It's like, that's like the idea that Sean gives off, that anybody that's left has left Jesus, has left anything conservative, has deconstructed. It's like, no, that's just, you got to know that's not real. That's a false narrative.
Right.
And even if they did deconstruct or turn liberal or what, that's not even the point. Like, it's possible that people are doing that because of you, So like, if people would come and just take some responsibility, and I don't know, any leaders that listen to this podcast, if there's anyone that ever confronts you or goes public, deal with it head on. Don't hide. Don't call them this, that, or the other. Just deal with it by giving them a phone call or finding a way to address it and take responsibility where you've wronged people. And like Richie said, I think it's awesome that you said, if you take a year off or 6 months off even, and just go like, let's reorganize, let's relook at this, and let's see if we can make sure we're doing things right by our staff, by our volunteers that are bending over backward and giving their lives, and then by our donors and by the Lord. I mean, that would be honorable, and it would show a lot of integrity. So, all right, Richie, I've said my final piece there, and I know you had a lot of great things. So thanks so much for everything, dude. And this will, if people have a story about Sean, then go to truthandfreedomstories.com, and there's an opt-in page. And that way you can share your story. Or if you guys are interested in more of this to find out what's really going on, go to that website, which we'll link below. All right, guys, thanks for tuning in, and we'll be back with another one soon.
Wake up and win. Wake up and win. Wake up and win. Wake up and win. Wake up.